Dicastery for Ecumenical Dialogue for Relations with Other Christian Churches and Ecclesial Communities this week published a document, an interesting document, entitled The Bishop of Rome. The title alone is significant and raises the possibility of reinterpreting the role of the Pope, both as a bishop and in relation to ecclesial communities, as well as in relation to the Catholic Church itself. The first thing to say, and I think it should be made clear at the outset in order to distance ourselves from some very sensationalist media headlines, the first thing to say is that this is not a doctrinal document. It is a summary of the ecumenical dialogue that has taken place over the last few years. So it is a summary of what has been worked on with different commissions, because there is for example, a commission for the Orthodox, another commission for the Armenians, the Copts, another commission for the Lutherans, another commission with the Anglicans. Well, the summary of all that has been discussed is now expressed in this document. It is a document that does not pretend and cannot approve anything new, a reinterpretation in the function of the papacy that would correspond to the doctrine of the faith. I insist, this document of the Dicastery for the Unity of Christians, and what it does is to present what has been talked about in these years. It is true that in this presentation it is said that it is possible that some even want to reinterpret the function of the papacy. Another thing that needs to be clarified is that the person who has guided this document and who has guided the ecumenical dialogue is Cardinal Koch. Cardinal Koch has been at the head of the Dicastery since 2010, so he has been the head of the document for 14 years. He was chosen for this position by Pope Benedict XVI. He is a person very close to theology and spirituality of Benedict XVI. He is considered one of the few remaining conservatives in the Vatican Curia. He was the only cardinal present in the small, select group that accompanied Monsignor Ganswein on December 31st when Mass was celebrated at the Vatican on the first anniversary of Pope Benedict's death. Therefore, if there is anyone who should not be suspected, it is Cardinal Koch. What does this document say? I insist that it is not a doctrinal document, but it is the summary of what was said. What does the document say? It says that there is a kind of consensus, so that the Pope becomes in some way, and not specified in that way, the representative of all Christians, even understood by Christian, who believes in the humanity and divinity of Jesus Christ, because there is also, apart from that, there is everything, and even in that, there is everything. That these dialogues have taken place, bilateral dialogues, there is more or less a certain anonymity that the Pope is the representative of all Christians. What does that mean? Well, in the principle that he would be a kind of honorary president, without any powers, a kind of primus inter pares, the first among equals, maybe and most. We're talking about the first millennium of a Christian history. Maybe at most he could have the role of supreme judge, of supreme tribunal of the church. When there are two theological currents confronting each other and the Pope, both go to the Pope, and the Pope decides this is the Orthodox current, this is the heretical current. At most. But when we talk about the first millennium, I do not know if everybody knows something about the history of the Church, because in the first millennium there is already a schism. Then there was another one, the definitive one, in the second millennium, but in the first millennium there was a schism with the Orthodox Church, so it was not all the bed of roses. That schism in the first millennium was certainly resolved. But in the first millennium, there was the schism with the Jacobites Nestorians, the Syrians. There was the break with the Armenians. There was the break with the Copts in the first millennium, and neither the respective councils, for example the Council of Chalcedon, nor the mediation of the Pope was of any use. Therefore, to state that in the first millennium the Pope was accepted by all as the supreme tribunal of the Church, I insist, it's not to know the reality of what happened. He was accepted by some, and to the extent it was convincing for them. This is in terms of reassignment of the figure of the Pope, with respect to the churches and ecclesial communities as a whole. To be able to accept this theoretical honorary papacy, to be able to accept it, it would be necessary, as the document says, to distinguish three different missions for the figure of the Pope. A first mission, a first task, towards the rest of the churches and ecclesial communities. A second mission as patriarch, it says, of the Western Church, of what we call the Catholic Church. A third mission, the Bishop of Rome, as the patriarch of the Catholic Church, that is, in the present some saints of Papacy. The document says that what was approved in Vatican I could be reinterpreted. We will have to see, I insist, what the doctrine of the faith says about how to reinterpret this, and it could not be reinterpreted in the sense of changing the Pope's authority to the decree, to declare something as a dogma of faith, because even for that, as the document also says, the Pope consults the Bishop of the world. Rather, it would be a reinterpretation of the universal episcopate that the Pope has within the Catholic Church. He is the universal bishop with full jurisdiction, which would be the reinterpretation of a more synodal sense, more of listening, collaboration. We will have to see what it means, for example, in terms of episcopal conferences or appointment of bishops. Who will appointment? Will it be the universal bishop, as it was in the case now, or will there be some other way of appointment? Will the episcopal conference have autonomy, or at least relative autonomy, to change the liturgy, morals, or canon law? In other words, we are faced with the possibility that this reinterpretation of Vatican I will not be directed to the proclamations of dogmas of the faith, but to the modification of what it means to be universal bishop for all the dioceses of the world. Even in the face of this honorary papacy, it is necessary to recognize. It is necessary to come down to reality and recognize what is happening. For example, where this is, and I do not say papacy, but honorary papacy, as it is in the Anglican Church, we see in reality that it is of no use. The Anglicans are in the process of internal rupture that is irreversible. There are many Anglican communities, all of them African, that have separated from Anglicanism to form a new kind of Anglicanism because of the drip that the Church has had. The Anglican Church have had issues on the blessing of gay couples, gay marriages, gay priesthood. Africans, but not only Africans, have said, "This has no place for us, we are leaving," and it has not helped that they have an honorary primate like the Archbishop of Canterbury. With regards to the dialogue of Protestant communities, ecclesiastical communities, Anglican, Lutherans, Calvinists, what we see in these years is that ecumenism is further away than when we began the dialogue with them after Second Vatican Council, because they have begun a drift towards theological liberalism that the Catholic Church, at least until now, has not followed. They have approved abortion, they have approved women priests, they have approved women bishops, they have approved everything that has to do with the LGBT ideology, which has caused them, as I said, an internal rupture in many of these communities, not only the Anglicans, but also the Methodists, for example. They have all accepted this, and they are further away from the Catholic Church than they were 40 years ago. Does this mean that an honorary papacy can be useful? Practical usefulness, I mean, when in these years, without the existence of this papacy, things have gotten worse and worse, and where this honorary primacy exists, as among the Anglicans, this honorary primacy has not served to keep the Church united. Let us look at the Eastern churches, especially the Orthodox. The relationship with the Orthodox is also worse than ever, sometimes for political reasons, the war in Ukraine, but sometimes also for theological reasons. It is Cardinal Koch himself who recently said that approval of fiducia supplicans, with the blessing of the possible blessing of homosexual couples, has broken the bridges of dialogue with the Orthodox and even the Armenians and Copts, with whom a certain understanding has been reached on very sensitive question of the divine nature of Christ. The Armenians and the Copts are monophysites, which means that they believe that there is only one divine nature, because of the human nature, which they also recognize is practically insignificant. They say that it's like a drop of water diluted in the sea. Well, progress was made on these issues, then fiducia supplicans came, and then the Armenians and Copts said they wanted nothing more than with the Catholic Church. Why? Because they accused the Catholic Church of being heretical by approving the blessing of homosexual couples, and thus separating itself from the common teachings of the Church. So that what is the ecumenical situation with one or the other to think that there's any possibility of an honorary papacy could have any practical significance? Indeed, that it could become a supreme body for settling theological disputes? Then, there is the other question. The Pope, as a universal bishop, as a patriarch of the Catholic Church. Well, it can be said that the Pope needs to be more synodal, that he needs to listen more to bishops' conferences and other bodies. That is all well and good, but what is the reality? There are many analysts who believe that bishops are or are becoming more and more like the top managers of a multinational company where the president or CEO can remove them if he does not agree with the management, and give examples of the case of Monsignor Alvarez in Arecibo, in the case of Monsignor Strickland in Tyler, and not only these two examples of the dismissal of bishops without there being juridical reason and trial that said you have committed the sin or you have been neglecting the issue of patricy, but simple dismissal without trial and without any reason that could be considered objective according to canon law. I repeat, there are many analysts who said that bishops in the diocese seem less like successors of the apostles and more like high officials of multinational company who can be dismissed whenever the boss wants. Not only these cases, the bishop have been deprived of important powers, for example, the possibility of approving new institution created in the diocese, an association of the faithful, a religious congregation, that can no longer do that. It will be decided and it will be done, only Rome can do it. Or the possibility, once a discernment has been made and the Vatican has been consulted, to decide if an apparition of the Lord of the Virgin is authentic or if it's a hoax. The possibility of discernment has also taken away from the bishops. They're left with possibility of making preliminary analysis, but the decision now rests in Rome. This is why I insist that according to many analysts, what progress has been made in the recent terms of patriarchal synodality, and in terms of dialogue with episcopal conferences. The episcopal conferences are listened to. They must be listened more, but as long as the Pope who decides who makes up the conference because he appoints the bishops, this listening, this dialogue can be like the dialogue, and it can take place in a parish council, whose members are appointed by the parish priest among his friends. I appoint you and I listen to you. And if you don't tell me what I want to hear, the appointment is over. I think the subject is sufficiently delicate, sufficiently important not to be taken lightly. There is one thing in the document that I like very much. It says that the primacy of the Church is not held by the Pope but by Jesus Christ. He has it. It says it explicitly, the Word of God. That is revelation, but revelation, as the Second Vatican Council also says, revelation is integrated by the Word of God and by tradition. I think we would do very well to give primacy to the Word of God and to tradition and to revelation, and not to do anything that goes against this revelation, because to do anything against it will not promote unity. But as we have already seen in our history, and as we see, for example, among the Anglicans, it will only contribute to increasing divisions. The primacy in the Church belongs to Christ. Everything else is pure and simple consequence. Until next week, God willing.